Welcome back to 40 Plus Fit, the podcast dedicated to optimizing your health and fitness in your 40s and beyond. I'm your host, Mike, and today we're tackling a question that pops up in almost every fitness conversation. How often should we actually be working out? The answer, as you might guess, isn't a one size fits all. It all depends on your specific goals and your starting point. And to help us navigate the optimal workout frequency for various objectives, I'm joined, as always, by our head coach here at 40 Plus Fit, Twain. Twain, great to have you back.
Hey, thanks, Mike. I think this conversation today is really interesting because the question is how often should I work out? But the real question is how little can I work out and still get results, right? That's always the underlying,
That's true. We're looking for the shortcut.
which is not wrong. Like we want to be as efficient as possible, I think, to a large degree. But I
Hmm.
also do think there's certain beauty in doing the thing for the sake of doing the thing, right? Not just to get the result. There's certain beauty in the pursuit of it because if not, everything just becomes like a rush to the destination, and then you kind of miss out on the journey.
That's true because there's so many things that happen along the journey, right? It's not necessarily just the journey
Yeah.
itself, but what happens along the journey. Like, give you an
Those are the
example.
things that help you grow as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry to interrupt you.
no worries. But like, let's say you take you're working out at the gym, or maybe you take on go play basketball, things like that. It's
Yeah.
also the connections that you can make with the people at the different places. We always overlook that from because we're like, oh, I have to go work out. It's gonna be so tiring.
Yeah,
We
it's
often
true.
overlook the connections that you can make like that and how that actually contributes to your mental health as well.
It is true. I mean, just to add on to that point, the social aspect really is key because that's one thing that keeps people going back, right? That consistency, that desire to actually go back and do that thing again or the activity again. I mean, I know for myself, going to the gym, while there's an aspect of going to the gym that for me is, yeah, it's my time. I like to go there. I want to get my workout done. I have some goals I want to achieve. I enjoy that part of it. But there's also the social part. Like honestly, I could easily spend 2.5 hours in the gym just because if I take my time, I train, I chit chat with people. There's a fun social element to that for sure.
Before we jump on too much of a tangent, perhaps that's another one for another
Yes,
podcast
yes,
episode.
yeah. Let's
Let's
go.
just give a little starting point here. For somebody starting out, maybe aiming for general health and a bit of weight management after 40,
Yeah.
what's a good baseline frequency to establish a routine, without feeling too overwhelmed?
Well, I think the easiest baseline frequency for somebody that's just starting out, in my opinion, would just be to try to do something every day. Okay. And where I'm coming from with this is because if you try to do something every day, you get used to it a lot quicker and it feels more normal and routine. A lot of times when people hear that, I think in their immediate thought is, shit, do I need to do like 1 hour every day of workout or something? Or even 30 minutes a day of workout, like that can sound very intimidating. I I think it doesn't have to be that way because there are different types of exercise that we need to do that is vital for us to keep healthy, to keep strong, and to maintain the body, which is you have to lift some sort of weights, or rather, you have to do some sort of resistance training, right? If you're just starting out, maybe it's not even lifting weights, just learning how to do a push-up. And then you have to do some sort of cardio to train your heart to be able to handle cardiovascular demands of daily life. So there are these two types of exercises. And if you were to do them every day, you could just alternate them and you could uh, do maybe just 10 minutes of each. Something really simple. So let's say 10 minutes of a cardiovascular exercise is to go outside. Let's say if you are not used to jogging, maybe you brisk walk really, really fast as though you're trying to get to the bus stop on time to so you don't miss the bus. You can start from there and then it brings your heart rate up. It's really good. And then you can do 10 minutes of just doing push-ups and squats and sit-ups, and then you can just alternate with that. So if you can start off from that point, I do feel for most people, a lot of them will find success in developing a routine and find it a lot more manageable, which makes it much easier for them to build upon. What's your thoughts on that?
Right. So I just want to expand upon that a little bit. Is that we touched on people that are really just starting out, right? So
Yeah,
that's their starting point. There is like they've not done this before. They've lived a really like sedentary life pretty much up until now. But you
yeah,
do get the other group as well that's had a very active life, maybe in their 20s, maybe early 30s, and then they've just had a couple
yeah,
of years out. what would you recommend here? How would the difference be between that person that's not really had any exercise before, but
Yeah.
compared to this person now who has an exercise background but has taken time off and it's now returning? How different would those two look like?
I would say it really does depend on the duration of the hiatus that they've taken. For some people, it's like years, right? You're talking decades that they haven't been back into exercise. Um, so obviously, if you try to just pick up where you left off, you'll be in for a very rude shock.
Guilty.
So, but yes, so by all accounts, you would match that description of somebody just starting out. But now, let's say if you've just been off it for a year or so, that's not too far away. And if you've been very active all your life, it's not going to be too difficult to kind of pick it up. I think, and I'm not going to talk about the psychological side first, I'm just going to talk about the physiological side of things. I think just getting into 3, 4 times a week, easing yourself back into maybe a 50% level of whatever you left off with is a great first starting point. You establish a baseline, you get your body acquainted with how it feels like to work out again. And then after that first week, you will probably experience some soreness. You've experienced, some of these aches, for sure, but it won't be so intense that it's going to feel like it will debilitate you. Day-to-day function is going to be
You chopped off the
compromised,
leg
right?
there.
Yeah, yeah. Like I've had people where they say like, oh man, I tried to do like my old leg day and I just couldn't walk for the entire week. And I'm like, dude, when was the last time you actually did a leg day? He said, oh, maybe 2 years back. It's like, okay, cool. You probably overdid it. Like go in there, do 50% of whatever you think you used to do. Just do 50% of that in terms of weights, in terms of the number of reps, and that's your starting point. And then after you just increase from there because when you make that first week easier, you acquaint your body with it, you condition up really fast. And then it's so much easier to build back up to previous. I've had people that, let's say they didn't train for maybe 1, 2 years. Okay. And then when they first start working together, we start working together, we try to establish, okay, what are these things you used to do? Right? Because they will have in their mind, oh, I used to be able to squat this, I used to be able to bench this, I could do how many push-ups, whatever. Okay, cool. So let's start from this part first, and let's give yourself maybe 4 to 8 weeks. And let's see how quickly you can get back up to those numbers. But let's start with this. What do you think? They'll be like, okay, cool. Let's say we'll take it on a week by week basis, we'll add on to that, we'll build up from there. And oftentimes I find the easier we start, the quicker they return to where they were actually at, and the faster they go past that. And a lot of times, those people that try to push a lot at the start very aggressively, they actually end up, you know, only matching where they were at, maybe way past the 8 weeks, maybe at the 12-week mark or even the 16-week mark. Then they get back. A large reason for that also is just because when they push too hard, they burn out, and then that means time off, or they get injury, or they get some sort of issue, right? That kind of affects their ability to stay consistent or to even stick with the thing.
Okay. I just want to backpedal a little bit here. Um, still talking about a good baseline frequency, right? You were
Yes.
touching on there 3 to 4 times a week. Is that primarily focusing on resistance training, or are you including a cardio element to that as well?
Oh yeah, I think just that 3 to 4 times a week was a bit too general. Did not provide any more specifics than that. So it includes both, and I would actually recommend 3 to 4 times a week. If you can do half-half, where you do maybe half an hour of weights, half an hour of cardio, that's that's probably a good starting point. If you wanted to, personally, what I would prefer and what I would start people off with is probably something closer to 40 minutes of weights, 45 minutes of weights, and then 15 to 20 minutes of cardio. Yeah, because I think those when you fit those two together, you more than meet the recommended guidelines for vigorous activity and exercise. And yeah, and that's like a good amount that will give you very tangible benefits that you can actually feel, or rather very intangible benefits that you can feel already.
Okay. So
Yeah.
we established then what the baseline frequency is, right?
Yeah.
Now let's look into maybe some goals. So if my goal is primarily fat loss,
Yes.
would the frequency of workouts change?
And not really. to be honest, because with fat loss, your primary driver is still going to be a diet. There's
Mm,
no amount of exercise. I think we always have to emphasize there's no amount of exercise that can outwork your diet. Okay, but that being said, um, you want to still make sure you're getting a decent amount of exercise in because whatever nutrients you take in needs to go where it needs to go, right? And if you stress the body appropriately, your body will be more likely to put those nutrients into the correct areas, even if your nutrition balance might be a little bit more subpar.
mm. This
Yeah.
is a
So poor
conversation I,
nutrition,
mm,
yeah, poor nutrition plus so the ranking scale goes like this. Okay. The worst is poor nutrition, no exercise. Then the next up would be some exercise, poor nutrition. And then the next up would be, okay, you're doing really well with the exercise, but your nutrition is terrible. And then the next up from that would be your nutrition's really good and your exercise is really good.
mm. This is a conversation that I have quite often, because the general go-to is when I need to lose weight, I need to go and exercise. That
And you go and
includes like
exercise and
either
you run, right? That's
walking or
always
running or some element of this kind of thing. And the people, I know
yeah.
my body, I just need to go and run. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, do you want to go run 5 kilometers or do you just not want to eat that bingsu?
It's true, it's true, really.
Yeah. So it is an element that comes into play. And yes, when fat loss is your primary goal, look at the diet first before looking at anything else. Then what about if you're really keen on building muscle and strength?
Yeah, I mean the 3 to 4 times benchmark would still be a good starting point. I would work on increasing the rate of effort first, so really maximizing those 40, 45 minutes, maybe up to an hour. You might adjust it up to an hour in that case, and your cardio might not necessarily be something that you will emphasize a lot on. Just making sure you're getting enough general activity in and you're training really hard for those 3 to 4 times a week, 60 minutes each time. I think that would give you a really good starting point. Now, your cardio, we could, if you had time, you could add in extra cardio sessions after that too. Uh, but what I would usually suggest for people is maybe on the rest days, go in and do some sort of HIIT style cardio just to train the cardiovascular system. So it's a bit shorter, it doesn't take up as much time. Of course, they're subject to recovery. Some people don't recover as well from HIIT style workouts. HIIT style cardio workouts. And when I say HIIT style, I don't mean, go onto YouTube and search for like some HIIT workout or HIIT as I put it in inverted commas because it's not really truly HIIT, but they take you to jump around, do burpees or some random shit. When I mean HIIT, I mean like proper cardiovascular HIIT where you go in there, you get on the bike and you pedal like, a T-Rex is chasing you for yeah, for 30 seconds, and then you go easy for 30 seconds, and you repeat that for 10 times. Like literally 10 minutes of doing that, right? It's going to get you so much more benefit than some random 30, 45 minute body weight F45 hit workout nonsense.
I think that also depends on your starting point, right? Because
Yes,
for
yes.
some people, those
But
30, 40 minutes of YouTube video is like being on the bike riding away from the T-Rex.
no, it's true. But here's the thing also, because I will still default to saying go and do it on the bike because it is it's self-regulated already. Meaning your perception of whatever your 100% is on a bike is already going to be that relative to what you can do at that point. So it matches your fitness level. So somebody else that is way fitter than you, their 100% is going to be, of course, a much higher RPM, much higher power generation, but it doesn't matter because it's relative to you. As long as you're on that bike and you're really pedaling it hard, you'll be fine. You get the effects relevant to your current fitness level. And the best part is things like that, they are usually not good, very injury. The injury risk is just so low because a bike doesn't have the eccentric component. You can do
Yeah.
that on the rowing machine as well. You can do that on an elliptical as well. All these do not have very high injury components as well. And they are regulated towards your current fitness level.
While you're talking there, I was just trying to think back, and I can never actually recall ever pulling a muscle or straining in anything on a bike.
Yeah, you won't. That's why we use it as a rehabilitative tool,
Oh.
especially for people with like knee issues and post knee surgery stuff. Once they can get enough flexion and range back to their knees and stuff, yeah,
Mm.
straight away on the bike.
Okay. You touched on rest and recovery days.
Yes.
As we get older,
Yeah.
do these days become more important, or is it still sort of the same as when you were younger? Like,
I mean, you can tell when we laugh. I think that yeah, they definitely do become more important. The difference between somebody that is training that's well, we use over 40s here as our marketing niche and stuff, but I think it's definitely a spectrum, right? And as you get older, your recovery demands, or your recovery ability, rather, not demands, your recovery ability starts to drop just purely from the aging process. And then, of course, you talk about lifestyle stuff, you talk about less than optimal recovery habits that people have, people doom scrolling at night, not getting enough sleep, all this kind of stuff. So when you factor all these things in, yes, when you get older, life is just more stressful and your recovery ability tends to drop. You can try to maximize that up further and you'll be surprised how much more you can achieve. But you will want to be more mindful of like how are you actually recovering relevant to the exercise that you're doing. Okay. So but it still comes down to the same thing. You still want to push yourself pretty hard in training. And then you see, okay, am I actually recovering from it? And if after a period of time you're getting certain symptoms where you're under recovering, then you might want to pull back a little bit, give your body a bit more chance to recover, and then work on those recovery habits as well if they're not optimized.
hmm.
Yeah,
Perhaps,
and I'm talking
perhaps,
about like,
perhaps you can
sorry,
just elaborate a bit more on recovery habits, because like
yeah,
a lot of people, when you talk to them and you mention the idea of rest day, rest day means I can lie in front of the TV the whole day
yeah,
and just do nothing, but that's not
yeah,
necessarily optimized. So perhaps you can just elaborate a bit.
yeah. So in terms of recovery habits, I would say there are a few categories we can group them under. There are the very active things that we can do. They are like one-off active recovery things that a lot of people tend to focus on, but actually have the least impact. Okay. The other stuff that you can do are not one-off active things, but consistent daily habits that can help. All right. So I'm going to focus on those two first, then I'll talk about the other modalities. So the first recovery habit all relates to sleep. How can you improve the quality of your sleep? And I think a lot of that comes down to pre-bed, what's your routine? How do you wind down for the day? I think a lot of people are often very wired up all the way up until they are lying in bed, right? Most people doom scroll in bed and then after that they try to sleep, So your brain's still going, right, for the large part of things. So there's no proper wind down routine. And I think putting in a wind down routine is very important. Now, the wind down routine overlaps with this other aspect of recovery that's also just as important, which is your stress management side of things. Now, stress management comes down to what do you actually do to help you feel more relaxed? What do you actually do to which feel more relaxed means upregulate that parasympathetic nervous system aspect, right? Where you're trying to chill out a bit more. And I think some people might immediately listen to this and say like, oh man, how am I going to chill out? I have so many things to do, blah, blah, blah. They say, yep, I understand. Like that's the nature of life. We have to find that balance and figure out what phase of life are we in and how do we still afford to take some time for ourselves? For some people, they're in a phase of life where, oh, you know what, I can still pursue my hobby. I can put aside time for that to kind of do that. For some people, maybe you're in a phase of life where you have to hustle a bit more and you need to find a little bit more smaller tactical periods and times, like maybe 15 minutes bedtime wind down routine kind of thing. Yeah, so there are elements to this that is super, super important because stress management side is I think everybody has heard of rest and recharge. And I think we did an episode on this way back, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So rest and recharge. Resting is the sleep part. That's just like making sure the hardware is okay, all good. And then the recharge part is the software updates, right? You're debugging in the software updates. So if you are always so caught up, you can get as much sleep as you want, but if your mind is not able to take a break, it's just as good as you not having full recovery. So I think these two factors here are really, really important. And a large part of stress management, honestly, is not about any one modality or anything. It's just about learning that life will have a lot of stresses, and how do you actually navigate through that, right? How do you let things, all the small little things, how do you let them not affect you? How do you make it such that you can become an even more chill person? So honestly, stress management at its core is really about perspective. Yeah. But if you talk about the modalities in terms of physical, stress, like how do we recover a bit better? And from a training perspective, yeah, I would say on the rest days, going in, doing some higher levels of low intensity activity. For a lot of people, that's just clocking steps. You can double things up, with some stress relief by walking outside. I have some clients where for them, the post-dinner 30-minute walk outside in the park connector is actually a really stress relieving moment for them. Just be alone with their thoughts for them to kind of consolidate things and wind down for the day. So those are some good tactics you can use. Low intensity activity is a really good active recovery model. And of course, you have the other 1% of stuff. Things like go for a massage, go for whatever, you know, therapy relief treatment that you have, like physical therapy stuff. All these we call it, I think, compassionate touch. That's what a massage is, like compassionate touch, and it helps you feel a bit more relaxed, feels great post massage. Yeah, by all means, if you find that worthwhile to do and get a good benefit, I'm all for it.
You were mentioning there about low intensity exercise, right?
Yes.
Resistance state. What about if we go back to the actual workout itself? Like, how much does the intensity of the workout impact how frequently someone should be training? Like, does a very intense session require more recovery than a moderate one?
Oh yes, yes, 100%, 100%. Intensity of a session has a uh inverse relationship with the sorry has inverse intensity of the session. Sorry, let me just get my thoughts straight. Intensity of the session has a correlated relationship with the amount of recovery. So the more you do, the bigger that recovery debt you're digging that you need to pay back. Yeah. Um, but and that's why also to some degree the intensity of the session also has a inverse relationship, opposite relationship with the frequency as well. So the more intense you do the thing, because you need more recovery time, the less frequently you can do that kind of intense session. So that means if you're doing like, again, 4 times, 5 times a week, 6 times, like I train 6 times a week, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, and I waive my training in certain levels of intensity so that I can still be able to recover from what I'm doing well. So some sessions are a lot more intense, some sessions are moderately intense, and then some sessions are a lot easier to recover from, like sub-moderately intense, if you will.
Yeah. I find like we're very how shall we say, we're not very reliable when we rate our own workouts, right?
Oh
Like
yeah,
something that I would say is like, oh, this is very intense. You might look at the workout itself and see the results and everything, and you're like,
yeah.
really, on a scale of 1 to 5, maybe this is only a 2 or a 3. Why are you rating this a 5? You know what I mean?
Um,
And so I think a question that I would also like to ask here is oftentimes we say cardio is
yes,
super intense,
yeah,
right? And then you ask, what cardio did you do? And I say, oh, I played some tennis, right?
yeah,
Or I climbed the hill, or I played some badminton, this kind of
yeah.
stuff. Would you still call that as when you're saying then when you talk about the high intensity that you were just speaking of versus the moderate intensity, would you say that those fall under a high intensity, or are they more seen as a moderate intensity when it comes to the aspect of recovery?
I think um there are a few things to consider here, but because at the end of the day, intensity is still relative to the individual's current levels.
Mm,
But that also has a psychological component. That means somebody who's not used to pushing hard will, in terms of objectively, potentially just be training at a level that's not very intense. Um, so you gave a few examples of like cardiovascular activities, right? They're all, I suppose they're all, if you talk about intensity, intensity by its nature usually refers to level of effort. If you talk about it from like a scientific point of view. So it's level of effort means like what percent, if you talk about lifting, it's like what percentage of your 1 rep max are you actually pushing? That's actually what intensity refers to. Not about how hard you're pushing per se. But let's say if we talk about cardiovascular activity, usually intensity is measured by, and this is where RPE actually came from, the rate of perceived exertion, right? So in layman terms, it's just how hard does this feel? And they actually had a 20-point scale for people to kind of rate that. And now we simplify it down to like 10. It really doesn't matter, to be honest, because it's just like, it's a scale for you to rate how hard it feels for you. And then that's the first starting point. You rate this, let's say a 10 out of 10, you know. And 10 out of 10 is like, I'm lying on the floor dying. I could not do anymore. You asked me to take another step. I could not do it. I take another step. Yeah. So I think there are certain things that will be at a lower intensity, just by its nature. For example, just doing a hike, right, up a, any regular mountain trail hike, while it can feel tough relatively, I think for the most part, absolutely, it's not usually very, very challenging. Uh, I hope people understand where I'm coming from here. Like, it will feel tiring, don't get me wrong, especially if you're not very
Yeah.
fit, okay, and you have a lot of weight to carry up yourself up. But from a perspective of, let's say, like cardiovascular fitness, is probably not going to be absolutely intense. Okay, versus if you're doing sprints up a hill, okay, now that's super intense, right? You could not do that for very long. You could sprint up a hill, and then that how much you will actually be running after, like, you do that the first time, maybe you clock this timing. Do the second time, maybe you get quite close. You do that third time, you probably see almost a 40% drop off already in terms of how long it takes you, and then it just drops off exponentially after that. And then after that, you'll be like, oh, dude, I'm trying to sprint, but I'm from the outside, it just looks like, that Austin Powers flick where there's that one guy that falls down on the ice, and then he's using the what's it called, a Zamboni on the
Uh-huh.
ice. He's riding the Zamboni over to the guy, right? And they zoom in on it, and it looks like the guy's about to be run over by the Zamboni. He's like,
Yeah.
no,
And
no,
then zooms out.
and then it zooms out, and then it's like Austin Powers is like so far away.
And so
Right?
slow.
That's how it looks like. That's how it looks like. I'm trying my best to run up, but I'm actually not moving very much. So yeah. So in terms of how intense it is, right? Like, that's kind of the intensity differences that we have to consider. In terms of lifting weights, I can tell you, because that's my more primary domain. In terms of lifting weights, a lot of times, why, like, previously I would teach people, okay, how do you regulate stuff? How do you actually kind of rate it upon 1 to 10? I'll teach them that. And then what I would do actually is I'll tell them, okay, I want you to get closer to the 9 or the 10, the 9 or the 10. I really want you to push, especially if they're a beginner. I'll put them on very safe machines, and I'll teach them how do you actually push yourself, because to be able to push yourself in exercise is a skill in and of its own self. And that's how it relates to intensity. Because a lot of times, if people kind of stay within their comfort zone, right? Like, when we do exercise, we tend to do that. Okay, most people that are listening to this probably will do that. Like, that's my experience with 90% of the population. In fact, for some of the people that I've worked with that have been in the gym on their own, intermediate lifters that have been training for a while, a lot of them are undershooting how hard they're actually pushing. Just like what you said, we tend to underestimate how hard we're actually pushing. And
Mm.
there's a very objective way, at least with lifting, to be able to see that. It's very similar to what I just described with the perceived effort, and then the person actually running really slowly. So it's the same thing with the weights. It's like, I'm trying to push this as fast as I can, but involuntarily, because of the fatigue coming in, the movement of the rep is really slow. It starts to
Mm.
slow down a lot. And so I've seen people where you can see some exercises they do, and they're like, okay, they stop. And you ask them, like, why do you stop? Like, it looks like you can still get at least another 5 reps. They say, oh, because it felt tough. They'll be like, okay, cool, cool. The next round, let's try to get that same number of reps and plus one. Okay, so next time you feel like you want to stop, just do one more rep. Let's see how it goes. And then they'll do that, and they'll be like, oh, cool. Actually, I could do another rep. And it's okay. Let's just repeat that on the next set, and the next set, and the next set. And then it really comes to a point where they're trying their best to just move the weight and get the weight up, and they're just like, it's moving slow as hell. Then like, okay, cool. Now you're hitting the failure point. And then when you let them look back at that, they'll be like, oh wow, I actually did like 5 more than that point where I thought I was done. So I think by nature, most of us do not estimate our intensities very well. So on that note, I would say, especially if you're going in, it's okay if it feels uncomfortable at the beginning. Like, just stop where it starts to feel uncomfortable, especially that first week. And then the next week, tell yourself, okay, cool. When I reach that level of where it starts to feel uncomfortable, let me just push it a little bit more. Maybe if it's your running, maybe it's 1 extra minute or even 30 seconds, right? I'll just try to maintain this pace an extra 30 seconds, see where I end up. If you're lifting, it's just like, okay, let me just do one more rep and keep playing with that because at the beginning stage, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to find and learn how do I actually push myself? Where's that point?
Mm. I find the same thing with running is when you take people running sometimes you'll see that they'll run and then they'll just stop. And it's like, hey, why are you stopping? It's like,
Yeah.
oh, I cannot anymore, cannot anymore. And then we'll walk for a little bit and then they want to run again. And then we run again. And then a little while later,
Mm.
oh, they stop again. It's like, oh, I cannot run, cannot run. And then my thing is that with running, it's the same kind of thing. And I always loved this advice. There was this Korean celebrities, I think it was four ladies. They went and they trained to do an Ironman. And
Yeah.
so one of the things that they had to do during the training was they had to run a 5 km. And so they were struggling to do that in the beginning. So they met up with some professional triathletes. And so one of the celebrities went and asked one of these female athletes and asked, you know, what's the best way to train to improve on a 5 km? And so her reply was run a 10 km. She's like, huh? What? Yes, run a 10 km because if you can run a 10 km, 5 km becomes far easier and you have far more stamina
Yeah.
to run faster for that 5 km. So I follow a similar kind of philosophy. Is like I'll plan a route that I go running and I'll
Yeah.
say, okay, I know I'm capable of running this particular route. And if I'm running with somebody, then I plan it according to what their capability is. But what I don't take into account is the speed that you run at because everybody determines their own speed as they run.
Yeah.
And so I always say is rather run slower, but try and finish this course, than run faster and then walk and then try run again and so on and so on. If your goal is to improve your stamina and to improve your endurance, because a lot of the times what you're fighting is not the physical body, but you're fighting the mental that's saying, no, I don't want to do this. The body
Mhm.
is like, I can do this. I still probably have
Yeah.
another good kilometer or 2 kilometers in me. But the
Yeah.
mind is like, oh, I'm too tired. I don't want to do this anymore. And so that overtakes what the body can do. And then
Yeah.
you end up stopping. But when you start breaking through those barriers, just like what you're saying that happens in the gym, you start breaking through those barriers, you start to see that actually you're capable of a lot more here. And you then you see the improvements start happening.
100%. I think you mentioned that point that you said about your body actually has more. It's very, very important. Like the mind is the one that gives up first. I remember when I was back in the army, they will always quote the Navy SEALs and they'll be like, when you think you're done, you're only 40% done. That thing they will always quote to us, especially when we going through cadet course and stuff, and we were going through like Hell Week, especially we had our Hell Week to go through. They put you in these situations where it's mentally meant to try to break you.
Hmm.
Yeah. But then they always, prep prior to that, they prepped us and they would tell us like, hey, always remember this when you feel like you are done, you still have more on you.
Uh, Now that I just spoke here about running and that, what if somebody's looking to improve their running, cycling, or tennis, or whatever,
Mm.
just basically their general stamina? How would workout frequency play a role there?
To be honest, for cardio, I feel like the more frequently you can do it, the better. And sometimes it also becomes a logistical thing because you reach a point where you literally need to do a lot more volume of it to get better. And so you can't realistically do all of that volume in one day. If not, you'll be on a 2 hour bike ride or whatever that you're going to do, right? So you probably want to go in there and be like, okay, I will try to get as much as I can daily, spread it out, and then keep pushing it, especially for cardio. For weight training, because it's a lot more like localized fatigue and stuff. And it actually has a high impact on the nervous system as well. So you do have to undulate that a bit more. Some days, like I said, you go heavier and then you give it a little bit more space from that day, how you structure your training, so that the other trainings that come maybe the next day or the day after, maybe either low, more moderate intensity, so you're kind of like respecting those intensity markers that I mentioned.
Sorry, I was just trying to see. For some reason, my mind is blank here at the moment, but I can't remember the podcast that I was listening to. But there was a sports. It's one of these big podcasts with one of the British hosts,
Ah. Must be one of those what Diary of a CEO or one of
Something like that. But basically,
yeah.
they had this sports scientist on, and she was saying is that a lot of times we emphasize the 10,000 a day walking, but she has found that through all her studies and everything that she's done, that if a person actually takes 20 minutes of focused intensity in a workout, you actually see more benefits from that 20 minutes than you'll see from the 10,000 steps that you've done during the day. Because oftentimes people will look at the 10,000 steps, and that 10,000 steps, maybe 9,000 of them was actually just you leisurely walking around. There was no real push. Whereas maybe the 20% one, you really pushed yourself to the limit and, sorry, saw quite, your intensity was a lot higher, like what we were referring to earlier. What are your thoughts on that?
I actually would agree with that because I do think that realistically speaking, for a lot of people, getting the 10K steps in might not necessarily be very realistic. Like you really have to prioritize time in, right? And if you don't work in a job where you have the luxury of moving around, it honestly can be a challenge. Like a lot of my clients who are able to get the 10K steps in, not only do they prioritize some time to walk, but their jobs already have them moving about. So those clients kind of have already are experiencing, okay, I need to prioritize this extra amount. So for somebody that's like completely sedentary style job, where like realistically speaking, again, you're not going to be moving around much, getting 10K steps is not going to be easy. So on that front, it's probably a better idea to go in, do that 15, 20 minutes of harder intense cardio and get those stimulant benefits. You're not going to get the benefits like we're not doing it for fat loss, right? We're doing it for that cardiovascular adaptations, which obviously will lead to further metabolic adaptations as well, which is a good thing. So I do agree with that very, very, very largely. But as always, things are context dependent. So
Yeah.
if you find that a challenge, then and really the lowest hanging fruit you can do is just getting more steps, then obviously just get more steps.
Mm.
Like anything is still better than nothing, but you have to be mindful of like I'm putting this level of the thing that I'm doing, what's the expected result? Regardless of how it feels to you. Like we both are valid, right? Where it can feel like you're making a lot of you're putting a lot of effort and you're doing this big thing and you can celebrate that, but you also have to be real about like, yeah, if I'm only getting extra 1,000, 2,000 steps a day, that's not going to make such a huge physical difference for me, you know? Yeah. So I do think that's important to recognize.
Okay. So that will lead me to the next question then is that, what are your thoughts then on shorter, more frequent workouts versus longer, less frequent ones?
Oh yeah, as I mentioned earlier in the at the beginning of the episode, I would say the shorter, more frequent workouts have a really good purpose of helping you get into the habit of being more routine with exercising. So making it very normal, like helping you integrate it into your identity. I think that's really the main function of doing it that way. For practical reasons, for a lot of people, I would say those that are very have a very erratic schedule, shorter, more frequent workouts would also be better, mainly because the recovery demands don't feel as intense. If you go in there, you do 15, 20 minutes where you're lifting weights, you're pushing a couple hard sets, you generally will still feel okay. You feel probably perhaps you might even feel more energized after the workout versus if you did a full on 1 hour, 1.5 hour, full bodybuilding style, pushing the gym hard, by the end of that, you might be tapped out already. So I do think for certain populations that can be very useful, and then logistically speaking, it can also be very useful. Like I myself have used that even in my own prep, especially when some of my training sessions, I look at it, I'm like, okay, this week's volume is honestly really high, and let me split it up a bit more. I go in there early in the morning, I get some stuff done. Later after this, I go in and get more stuff done. I split it up, and it can be done that way as well.
Mm. Okay, finally, final question is that what if a person hits a plateau? You know, is it worth looking at changing your workout frequency?
I don't think necessary frequency is the first thing I would look at, because there are a lot more other factors there that you would consider first, which is, I mean, one of the big ones is just how long have they actually been in this period of working towards this goal, right? And then how long has this plateau been in the first place? Because for some people, after 1 week of not seeing any progress, for them that's a plateau. I'm like, no, that's normal. That's normal, you know? Yeah. So identify whether it is a plateau in the first place. I don't think frequency is one of the many variables we might, tweak that down, but it's not the first thing we will look at.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that covers. Do you have anything else you want to chat about with regards to this?
No, because I think frequency of workouts or how often I work out probably is as we have been discussing, it's a variable that is entirely dependent on so many other factors. But I feel like we've done a good job of breaking it down and discussing it from a few important angles already.
Right. So I think it's safe to say that there's no single magic number for workout frequency, but
Nah,
rather a strategic approach that aligns with individual goals. So listening to our bodies and prioritizing smart recovery, especially as we get older.
yeah, especially as we get older, that's the key word here. Yeah.
All right. So if this conversation has helped you pinpoint your ideal workout frequency, or if you know someone else who's trying to figure out their fitness routine, please do share this episode. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, and even TikTok. Just look for 40 Plus Fit. And of course, hit that subscribe button to make sure you never miss another episode packed with actionable advice for your journey to a fitter 40 and beyond. Until then, stay consistent and keep moving smart.